We live in a world where being a good person is treated as the highest virtue. From early childhood, we're taught to be kind, generous, selfless, and morally upright. Society rewards us for it, at least on the surface. Good behavior is praised in schools, celebrated in media, and admired in social circles. But underneath this moral theater, an uncomfortable question lingers. Is being good actually effective in the real world? Niccolo Machiavelli, the infamous Renaissance thinker, dared to say what others feared to admit. Goodness alone isn't just insufficient. It can be dangerous. In his most well-known work, The Prince, Machiavelli doesn't argue that morality is worthless. Rather, he challenges the assumption that moral virtue guarantees success, stability, or justice. And more importantly, he shows how the blind pursuit of virtue can make people and societies vulnerable. For Machiavelli, the political and personal realms are not governed by the same rules. In politics, power is the currency, not virtue. A leader who clings too tightly to ideals of kindness and fairness will quickly be outmaneuvered by more ruthless opponents. In life, as in leadership, those who survive and rise are often those who understand when to appear good and when to act without hesitation, guilt, or compassion. This is the dark side of goodness, the naive belief that being morally right protects us from harm. But the world is not a moral place, it's a competitive, often brutal arena. Machiavelli understood that power doesn't bow to virtue, it bows to strategy. So how does this apply to your everyday life? Think of the colleague who manipulates behind closed doors but gets promoted. Or the partner who pretends to be generous but uses guilt as leverage. Or the political leader who wins not by telling the truth, but by telling people what they want to hear. In all these cases, goodness isn't rewarded. Performance is. Machiavelli's genius lies in his willingness to expose this uncomfortable truth. He doesn't romanticize power, but he does dissect it. He reveals how those who want to change the world must first understand it as it is, not as they wish it to be. And that means seeing beyond the illusion of goodness. Importantly, Machiavelli isn't advocating cruelty for its own sake. He doesn't promote evil, he promotes clarity. He urges us to understand human nature, its ambitions, fears, weaknesses, and inconsistencies. Once we understand these things, we're no longer controlled by them. Modern psychology confirms what Machiavelli intuited centuries ago. People are not purely rational or virtuous beings. We are driven by emotion, by status, by fear of exclusion, by unconscious desires. And the person who understands this, who sees through the mask of moral behavior, can navigate life far more effectively than the one who clings to ideals in a vacuum. But here's the twist. Machiavelli doesn't want us to abandon morality entirely. He simply believes it should be one tool among many, not the only one. Goodness, when applied wisely, can be powerful, but when applied blindly, it becomes weakness. To live effectively in the real world, we must learn to balance virtue with realism, compassion with strategy, honesty with awareness of risk. True power isn't about dominance, it's about adaptability. It's about knowing when to act with kindness and when to act with calculated detachment. In the next part of this series, we'll explore Machiavelli's views on appearances, why being perceived as good is often more important than actually being good, and how this insight has shaped political power, personal influence, and human relationships for centuries. Because in a world where perception is power, the person who controls the image of goodness often holds more sway than the one who genuinely lives it. Like this kind of content? Follow the channel and leave a like. Really appreciate it. Now back to the video. In a perfect world, authenticity would be everything. People would be rewarded for who they truly are. Goodness would be seen and appreciated for what it is, genuine, selfless, and honest. But as Machiavelli understood, and as the modern world confirms, we don't live in that kind of world. We live in a world of appearances. One of the most controversial and misunderstood aspects of Machiavelli's philosophy is this. He suggests it is often better to be seen as good than to actually be good. At first glance, this may seem like a call for dishonesty, but look closer and you'll see something deeper, a brutal clarity about how humans operate. People are not mind readers. They cannot see into your heart. What they believe about you is based on what they perceive. If you appear moral, trustworthy, and noble, people will treat you as such. If you appear weak, naive, or unguarded, even if your intentions are pure, you become an easy target. This isn't cynicism, it's realism. History is filled with examples of kind leaders overthrown by the very people they tried to protect, while ruthless tacticians built empires. Why? Because people trust image. They respond to confidence, charisma, and certainty, even when those things are carefully constructed illusions. Social media has brought this Machiavellian truth into sharper focus than ever. Influencers curate every detail of their lives to project authenticity, goodness, and moral superiority. Brands craft missions not just to sell products, but to signal virtue. Politicians wear empathy like a mask, while engaging in ruthless realpolitik behind the scenes. And it works. Machiavelli wasn't warning us against appearances, he was warning us to master them. To live effectively in society, we must understand the power of perception. Your reputation is a currency. Spend it wisely. Protect it fiercely. He writes, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." That's not a flaw in human nature, it's a fact of it. And once you accept this, you stop playing the game blindly. You start becoming an intentional player. But here's the catch, becoming skilled in appearances isn't about faking your life. It's about understanding which truths to share, which to withhold, and how to frame your values in a way that doesn't expose you to unnecessary risk. It's not manipulation, it's navigation. Many people confuse honesty with transparency. They believe being honest means showing everything, their doubts, their pain, their inner turmoil. But Machiavelli would say, don't confuse openness with wisdom. The world doesn't owe you understanding. Your truth, unfiltered, may be noble, but it can also be used against you. So what's the solution? Strategic authenticity. You don't need to become a deceiver, but you do need to become conscious of your social presence. Ask yourself, how do I come across to others, especially in positions of influence? Am I projecting clarity or confusion, strength or uncertainty, reliability or chaos? You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be intentional. There's a certain freedom in this. Once you let go of the need to be morally flawless, you gain something better, awareness. And with awareness comes power, the power to influence, to protect yourself, and to lead others not through idealism, but through grounded clarity. Now, this doesn't mean you should abandon values. In fact, the opposite is true. When you understand the world doesn't reward goodness automatically, you become more intentional about how and when to apply your values. You stop expecting virtue to defend itself and start defending it with strategy. Think of the most effective leaders in history, not the loudest, but the most enduring. Many of them weren't the purest souls, but they understood human psychology. They knew that image and influence are inseparable. They cultivated appearances, not to lie, but to lead. And so should you. In Part 3, we'll explore why ruthless people so often rise to power, while good people are overlooked, sidelined, or even betrayed. It's not just about morality, it's about the psychology of systems, the fragility of virtue, and the unseen costs of playing fair in an unfair game. Because as long as people respond more to confidence than to character, power will belong not to the best, but to the boldest. There's a recurring pattern in history, business, and even personal life. The kindest people are often overlooked, while the bold, the manipulative, and sometimes the downright ruthless rise to positions of influence. It seems unfair. And yet, if you view it through Machiavelli's lens, it's not a flaw of the system, it is the system. Machiavelli didn't idealize the world. He didn't believe power goes to those who deserve it. Instead, he studied the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. In The Prince, he makes an uncomfortable point. Those who are too good, too moral, or too principled often fail, not because they lack ability, but because they don't understand the game they're playing. Why do ruthless people succeed? Because they're willing to do what others won't. Because they understand that power doesn't ask if you're fair, it asks if you're effective. Because they don't wait for permission. They take initiative, act decisively, and project strength. This doesn't mean they lack values. It means their values don't get in the way of their actions. Ruthlessness, in Machiavellian terms, doesn't always mean cruelty. It means strategic detachment, the ability to prioritize outcomes over emotional comfort, the courage to be feared when necessary, rather than constantly seeking approval, the willingness to make decisions others find too painful to consider. And let's be honest, our modern culture still rewards this. Look at the CEOs who slash thousands of jobs but triple company profits. The politicians who lie convincingly and dominate elections. the influencers who build empires on carefully constructed illusions. They may be criticized, but they're also followed, supported, and feared. And that, Machiavelli would argue, is the price of relevance. In contrast, the good-hearted are often consumed by self-doubt. They hesitate, they apologize, they second-guess. They care deeply, which is noble, but it often becomes a liability in high-stakes environments. They get caught in moral paralysis, trying to do what's right, while their more aggressive counterparts move ahead. It's not because good people are weak. It's because they often believe the world plays by the same rules they do. But Machiavelli knew better. He saw that power systems, whether in politics, business, or relationships, are not based on fairness. They are shaped by human psychology, fear, desire, loyalty, status. And anyone who understands these forces and knows how to navigate them has a serious advantage. This doesn't mean you have to become a tyrant, but it does mean you need to recognize when your desire to be good is making you powerless. Let's take an example. Imagine two leaders. One is kind, thoughtful, and endlessly concerned with being fair. The other is strategic, emotionally controlled, and willing to make tough decisions, even unpopular ones. Who do people respect more? It's usually the one who sets boundaries, protects their position, and doesn't hesitate under pressure. Why? Because in uncertain environments, people crave certainty more than compassion. They follow confidence, not kindness. Strength makes people feel safe, even when it's harsh. This is why ruthlessness, in the Machiavellian sense, often beats moral purity, because it reflects control. And in a chaotic world, control is power. So, what should the morally conscious individual do? Machiavelli wouldn't say, abandon your values. He'd say, don't let your values make you blind. Learn how to be both principled and powerful. Don't expect fairness. Create leverage. Stop asking for recognition. Command it. Being ruthless doesn't mean being heartless. It means knowing when to prioritize results over feelings, when to cut ties, when to lead without consensus, when to act in silence rather than wait for approval. It's about emotional discipline, not malice. Because here's the truth. When you combine goodness with strategic awareness, you become formidable. You're not manipulated by guilt. You don't bend to fear. You act from clarity, not compliance. And most of all, you're no longer playing someone else's game. In Part 4, we'll dive deeper into the internal consequences of moral idealism, how the obsession with being good can lead to guilt, burnout, and emotional self-sabotage. Because the dark side of goodness isn't only external, it runs through the mind of every person who struggles to reconcile power and principle. There's a hidden cost to being a good person that no one talks about. It's not failure, it's not rejection, it's guilt. Deep, chronic guilt. For not doing enough, for speaking up, for saying no, for choosing yourself, for wanting more. This emotional burden is the hidden tax of moral idealism, and Machiavelli saw it coming long before we gave it a name. He recognized that people who cling too tightly to moral virtue can become prisoners of their own conscience. Not because virtue is bad, but because it becomes a rigid standard, one that no real human can consistently live up to without breaking down. When your entire identity is built around being good, any moment of failure, anger, or self-interest feels like betrayal. You punish yourself for simply being human, and this, ironically, weakens you. Because in your attempt to always do the right thing, you become hesitant. You overthink. You avoid conflict. You shrink in the face of decisions that require force or firmness. You don't lose your values, you lose your power. Machiavelli didn't encourage cruelty. He encouraged clarity. And part of clarity is knowing that guilt, when misplaced, can be a weapon, used against you by others, or worse, by yourself. People who weaponize guilt often use your virtue as leverage. They question your motives. They imply you're not good enough. They manipulate your kindness to extract compliance. And if you don't understand this dynamic, you'll constantly bend to it. This is where self-sabotage enters. You turn down opportunities because they feel selfish. You tolerate toxic behavior because confronting it feels mean. You avoid ambition because it might make others uncomfortable. You say yes when you want to say no because you don't want to seem cold. But here's the truth. There is nothing moral about martyrdom. There is no virtue in self-erasure. If your kindness requires your silence, your exhaustion, or your self-betrayal, It's not kindness. It's guilt in disguise. Machiavelli would argue that true effectiveness requires balance. You cannot serve others from a place of depletion. You cannot lead if you're afraid to disappoint. You cannot influence if you're enslaved by your conscience. Being a good person doesn't mean being a powerless one. In fact, some of the most compassionate leaders in history were also some of the fiercest. They knew when to be tender and when to be tough. They knew that doing the right thing didn't always feel good in the moment. That sometimes mercy is a long-term game, not an instant fix. And they understood something modern culture often forgets. Boundaries are moral. Saying no is moral. Walking away is moral. Protecting your energy is moral. Telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is moral. The world doesn't need more nice people who burn out. It needs courageous people who can stand firm in their values without collapsing under them. If you're constantly overwhelmed by guilt for being human, for having needs, ambitions, opinions, you are not in alignment with virtue. You are in alignment with a performance of virtue. And that's not sustainable. So what's the way out? Stop measuring your worth by how little space you take up. Start measuring it by how aligned your actions are with your values, including your value for yourself. Real goodness includes you. It doesn't sacrifice you. This is the paradox Machiavelli reveals. The pursuit of goodness, when done without self-awareness, leads to fragility. But when done with clarity, intention, and emotional strength, it becomes true leadership. In Part 5, we'll shift focus outward, exploring how societies as a whole fall into the trap of moral posturing, how the collective desire to be seen as good blinds us to injustice, silences dissent, and protects appearances over truth. Because the dark side of goodness doesn't just live in individuals, it lives in institutions, in ideologies, and in the stories we tell ourselves to avoid discomfort. We like to believe that societies evolve toward justice, that over time we become kinder, more ethical, and more morally enlightened. But Machiavelli reminds us, appearances can deceive, and collective morality is often the most deceptive mask of all. In his view, a society's obsession with being seen as good is often more dangerous than individual selfishness. Why? Because it creates systems of illusion. Cultures where everyone performs virtue publicly while avoiding the hard, uncomfortable truths privately. You've seen it. Governments claim to stand for peace while funding war. Corporations flaunt social causes while exploiting labor. Social media users post about empathy while canceling others with vicious glee. What looks like moral progress is often just moral branding. Machiavelli would not be surprised. He understood that societies, like individuals, are invested in protecting their image, and that desire can blind them to reality, even when that reality is unjust, corrupt, or cruel. This is the dark side of collective goodness. It often demands uniformity, not honesty. It rewards those who say the right things, not those who question the script. It silences dissent, not because the dissent is wrong, but because it's inconvenient. Moral idealism at scale becomes ideology, and ideology, when sacred, becomes dangerous. Consider how public morality is often used as a weapon, not to uplift, but to divide, not to heal, but to shame. When a society fixates on proving its goodness, it begins to turn on anyone who challenges that self-image. The result? Blind spots. We ignore systemic problems because acknowledging them would tarnish the goodness narrative. We punish truth-tellers because they make us uncomfortable. We elevate symbols over substance, gestures over change, slogans over justice. Machiavelli would ask, is this really goodness, or is it fear disguised as virtue? Because true moral clarity is not afraid of contradiction. It doesn't panic when values clash. It doesn't pretend perfection. It admits error, allows dissent, and confronts the uncomfortable. But that takes strength, the very kind that fragile moral cultures lack. This also explains why good people are often isolated in moral societies. Because true goodness isn't always popular. Sometimes it means challenging the tribe. Sometimes it means standing alone. Sometimes it means saying what everyone else is too scared to admit. And Machiavelli understood. The truth-teller is often seen as the threat, not the savior. History proves this. From whistleblowers to revolutionaries, those who reveal society's hypocrisies are rarely celebrated in their time. They are silenced, exiled, or erased, not for being wrong, but for revealing what the collective wants to ignore. So, what can we learn from this? That being part of a good society doesn't make you good. That agreeing with the majority doesn't make you moral. That true ethics requires more than signaling. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to see through the illusion, to question even the things that make you feel righteous, to value truth over tribalism, clarity over comfort, substance over optics. Machiavelli didn't despise morality. He distrusted the way it's often used. He saw how easily it can become a smokescreen for power. And he warned, when goodness becomes theater, it stops serving people and starts serving systems. This doesn't mean we abandon moral ideals, but it means we pursue them with eyes open. We stop performing and we start practicing. We become less concerned with looking good and more committed to doing good even when no one's watching. Because in the end, the health of a society isn't measured by its image, it's measured by its integrity. In Part 6, we'll close this journey by exploring what it really means to lead with power and principle. How to be strategic without losing your soul. How to navigate a world of illusion without becoming part of it. And how to turn Machiavellian wisdom into something not cold, but deeply human. What if everything Machiavelli said was not a roadmap for corruption, but a challenge to evolve? What if his dark truths weren't cynical, but clarifying? This is the paradox of Machiavelli. He doesn't tell you to be evil. He tells you to stop being naive, to stop assuming that the world will reward you just for being good. And more importantly, to stop letting your ideals be the reason you stay powerless. So what does it mean to integrate power and principle? It starts with a shift, from purity to integrity, from performing virtue to embodying courage, from needing to be liked to being willing to stand alone. You don't need to become cold, but you do need to become clear. Clarity is not about abandoning your values. It's about knowing when and how to express them. It's about setting boundaries even when people don't like it. It's about telling hard truths even when they cost you popularity. It's about seeing people as they are, not as you wish they'd be. And that's the heart of strategic idealism. A strategic idealist is not someone who gives up on morality. They're someone who refuses to let morality become a weakness. They still care, but they know when to act. They still feel, but they're not controlled by feelings. They believe in justice, but they don't wait for justice to give them permission. They understand the nature of power, not to abuse it, but to balance it. Machiavelli knew that power is neutral. Like fire, it can destroy or it can illuminate. The outcome depends on the one who holds it. So how do you hold it with integrity? Master your emotions. If your enemies can provoke you, they can control you. Stay calm, stay precise. See the game, but don't become the game. Know how influence works. Use it ethically. Don't confuse manipulation with leadership, but don't confuse passivity with morality either. Be feared for your boundaries, respected for your clarity, and loved, not because you seek approval, but because you inspire it. Drop the guilt. Acting in your best interest does not make you selfish. Sometimes it makes you wise. Stay aligned. Let your inner compass be sharper than your need to please. Let your values guide your strategy, not obstruct it. Because here's the truth. We need more people with hearts and spines. Not just idealists who dream, but strategic idealists who build. This is what Machiavelli never said out loud, but what we can take from him. The world doesn't need more ruthless rulers. It needs conscious leaders who aren't afraid to face reality. People who can look darkness in the face without becoming it, who can work with power without losing their soul, who understand that survival is not the enemy of virtue, it is its foundation. And so we end with a choice. You can continue playing the role of the good person, waiting, hoping, suffering, or you can step into the more complex, more courageous role, the one who learns how to protect what's good by understanding how the world really works. That's not betrayal, that's wisdom. That's what Machiavelli offers us, if we're willing to listen. Not a path to corruption, but a blueprint for courage. Not a guide for tyrants, but a toolkit for thinkers. So be thoughtful, be kind, be honest. But above all, be strategic. Because power without soul is dangerous, But soul without power is irrelevant. And you were made for both. That's it for today. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, and don't forget to follow. See you next time.